Hello, kindergartners. Mrs. Boydston here, and I am incredibly excited about today's lesson. For this episode of Reading in a Nutshell, we are going to be talking about comprehension. Comprehension is a pretty big word. What does it mean? Basically, it just means being able to understand what you read. It's the goal of reading. And in order to comprehend what you're reading, you have to put together all of the information that you've learned about reading so far. But here's the good news. You don't have to be a good reader to begin working on your comprehension. In fact, you started working on your comprehension the very first time anyone ever read a story to you. Now let's think about it for a minute. If you wanted to drive a car, you've probably seen your mom and dad turn on the engine, put the key in there, or push the button. You can know that there's two pedals, a fast one, one to make you go faster and one to make you stop. But just knowing how to work a car, does that mean you can drive a car? Does knowing the rules of the road mean you'd be safe to drive a car? No way. What you have to do is you have to practice, and you have to practice regularly. And that's what we are going to be doing in learning about comprehension. I'm going to teach you the comprehension concepts and the comprehension strategies. And as you practice them just a little bit at a time each day, you'll find that you are getting better and better at reading. So, to start with, the comprehension strategies. The first step, this is important even before that, parents. Your kids are going to want to do what they see you doing. Whether you're reading a book for enjoyment or for entertainment, if you do it, they're going to want to do it. So the first thing you want to do, parents, is grab a book for yourself. And step 2, you want to read aloud to your kids. It does not matter when you read to them. It can be a bedtime story or a good morning story. It can be in the middle of the day. But you need to try to read aloud to your students every day. Let them sit in your lap or snuggle up next to you or sit on the floor in front of you like at school, whatever makes it the most fun. Plant the reading is fun seed now. It is never too late. When I taught 6th grade, I read aloud to my kids every day after lunch, and they always said it was the best part of the day. And for many of them, that's when they finally started to love reading. So that's a really quick, great way to get into your kid's brain and make them love reading. Here's some more good news. These are the comprehension concepts, and you can practice these both when you are reading to your child and when your child is reading with you, or when you're doing the reading Blue Bears. So let's get into it. First thing you want to do is look at the book you're reading and determine, is this fiction or is this nonfiction? I bet you remember what those mean, right? A fiction book is one that has a made-up story. This one is Harriet Can Carry It. This is definitely a made-up story, and we're going to talk about how can you tell in just a minute. This story is titled Down Comes the Rain. This is nonfiction. This is a made-up story, and this is full of true information. So by setting that purpose for your brain knows, am I going to be entertained? Am I going to be informed? Hopefully you're a little bit of both, no matter what book you read. When you read a book like Harriet Can Carry It, how many of you knew that it was fiction? How could you tell just by looking at the picture? Because it's a kangaroo carrying a bunch of beach equipment. She's going to the beach carrying looks like there's a surfboard and some flippers and a snorkel. No animals, especially even marsupials, they don't carry beach gear to the beach. So we know that that's a made-up story. That is going to be fiction. Nonfiction stories often are very straightforward. Even though this one has illustrations, not photographs, they're still realistic. And that can help you determine whether a story is a fiction or a nonfiction story. But here's a challenge for some of you. You do need to be careful. This story is called Lily Brown's Paintings, and it is a made-up story. It's fiction, but it's a fictional story about a girl who could be real. Look at these pictures. Does that look real? It sure does. How about this one? This is a nonfiction story about a boy and his grandfather. It's based on something that really happened. But in the middle of the story, the grandfather and the grandson have some amazing adventures together. So start off with fiction and nonfiction, and when you're ready for a challenge, you can go on and further determine What kind of nonfiction? What kind of fiction story is it? The next question you're going to want to ask yourself is, who is the main character? That's who or what the story is about. What do you think? Who's the main character in this book? Yes, Curious George is always the main character in his stories, and he's a good example of a main character because main characters almost always encounter a problem or a struggle that they have to overcome or fix. And that definitely happens to Curious George. Little bonus information, that person is called, or that monkey is called, the protagonist. You don't need to know that, but it's kind of a fun word to say, protagonist. Some more bonus information, every book, or almost every book, has not only a main character, but supporting characters. For example, the man in the yellow hat would be a good example of a supporting character in a Curious George book. And there's often, always, or not always, but often somebody who's against the main character. He's not the protagonist. Bonus information, he's the antagonist. Another thing you can think about and talk about as you're reading your stories is, what is the setting? Or you could say, what are the settings? Because setting means, where does this story take place? And when does this story take place? Let's see if you can figure this one out. The title of this book is Bathing All Over the Globe, All Around the World in a Bathtub. Believe it or not, this is a nonfiction story, and the setting is bathtubs. Bathtubs all over the world. It's how different kids in different cultures take baths. So the setting is in the bathtub, all over the world, at bath time, whatever that happens to be. Once you know who the characters are and you know where and when the story is taking place, you can begin thinking about the plot of a story. The plot is the beginning, the middle, and the end. Often there's more than 3 events that take place, but you can think about a story in that manner. In Pete the Cat and the Bedtime Blues, it starts off with Pete deciding to have a slumber party. And then in the middle of the story, none of his friends will go to sleep. And at the end of the story, Pete comes up with a solution. So that's an example of the plot of the story. You'll just have to listen to it later if you want to hear what happens. Another comprehension concept that people often overlook is, what is the author's purpose? Is the purpose of this book to entertain me, like, well, Pete the Cat and the Bedtime Story, or is it to give me some information, like Around the World in a Bathtub? That goes back to the fiction and nonfiction story. Bonus information, there are other authors' purposes as well. They may be trying to persuade you about something or simply describe an event. And finally, there's the theme. What's the theme of a book? It's not the topic, but it is what the main idea of the story is. For example, in the book, Ruby, in her own time, well, the main character is a duck and she's in the pond and she's trying to learn to swim. That's what it's about. It's about trying to learn to swim. But that's not the theme. The theme of this particular story is that we don't always all do things at the same time and in the same way. Ruby has to wait to swim until she's ready, and that's okay. So that's a good theme, perseverance and patience. So those are our comprehension concepts. I know that's a lot. You could go back and rewatch this and just think about one a day if you wanted to. Now, there are also some comprehension skill building activities, or strategies, we like to call these. The first one is, when you're looking at a book, activate your prior knowledge. Think about, what do I know about this already? And what do I want to know? And that's a really important question. When you ask yourself, what do I want to know? You literally open up a loop in your brain. I like to call it opening doors. When you've got the doors open in your brain is open and ready for business. It wants new information to come in. But you can think of it as a loop like this, because the brain always wants to close a loop. Now, if you were watching TV, even the news, what happens right before every commercial break? Somebody asks a question or something is about to happen, because the makers of that television show know that your brain wants to close the loop. So you're going to sit through that commercial and come back just to find the answer to the question. So you can set your brain up for learning and for comprehension by asking questions about a book before you even start it. Then as you read, you'll want to summarize the book. Retell the events of the story in your own words, much like I did with Pete the Cat and the Bedtime Story Blues. And being able to sequence things helps you out a lot here. And kindergartners, I know you remember we sequenced everything from nursery rhymes to fairy tales to just about every book we read in kindergarten. So you'll probably be pretty good at that. But when you have to say the events in your own words, it can make your brain understand, am I really understanding what's going on? Another strategy that we've worked a lot on is making a prediction. Do you remember what a prediction is? It's making a smart guess. So based on the words or the pictures, what do you think will happen next? And it's not about being right. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. It just matters that you're keeping your brain engaged. Then, of course, as you keep reading, you're going to check and see, was I correct? If you were not, you're going to revise your prediction. If you were correct, you're going to confirm it and say, good job, brain. Another comprehension strategy is to monitor and clarify. See, do you understand everything that's going on in this story? And you can ask yourself the W questions to do this. Who, what, where, when, why? And the H question, how? But you can just start with the basics. Chances are, if you can answer those questions, you are understanding the story. But if you get stuck on any of those questions, you might need to go back and reread. Are you ready for a bonus word? This is a challenge concept. Everyone say, metacognition. That's right, metacognition. That means to think about thinking. When you stop and think about how your brain is figuring something out, you're thinking about thinking, and your brain loves it when you do this. So if you start to get confused, stop and ask the W questions. If you come across a word and you don't know what the word means, you can also use the same strategies to help you. Read the words around it, look at the picture, see if you can figure it out. And if you can't, skip it, see if it makes sense later. And if it still doesn't make sense, go ask somebody. And if they don't know, ask them to look it up for you. Another strategy, and this is a really cool one, I love this. This is making connections. Your brain loves to make connections. Think of it this way. If you can connect one story and say it is similar in a way to another story, that helps your brain. Think about trying to connect. Let's say you wanted to hang your coat up on the wall. You want to connect your coat to the wall. If here's your wall, and I'm going to use this as my coat, there's nothing to connect it to. It's just going to keep falling. But if I can put a hook in there, I can connect it, and it's going to hang easily. Your brain collects information in just this way, and it will retain new information much more easily if you connect the new information to old information that you already have. For example, here are two books. Well, we can use the next strategy to help you with that. Here are two books called Good News, Bad News, and Fortunately. I'm going to compare these two books. In both of these books, one thing happens, and then another thing happens, and then another thing happens. But it always starts with that something good happens, and then something bad happens. So these books are the same. I can compare them by saying how they're the same. They're both about good news happening and then bad news happening. But in this book, the main character is a person. And in this book, the main characters are animals. So I can contrast them by saying how these stories are different. You see, that's some connections that your brain can make. If you've read one story, you could say, oh, this is the same as that other story I read. And you can also say how it's different, and it helps your brain keep that information organized. Now, as you read, adjust your speed. If you are going too fast, you might get confused more often. So the simple clue there is slow down. Also, if you want to make sure you understand something, you can slow down and say it out loud. But if you find yourself getting bored reading something and you're understanding it very easily, go ahead and speed up. That's okay, especially when you start reading for information and then you go back and reread to review the information. You can do something called skimming. That's more of a challenge topic, but some of you are probably ready to learn to skim at least on a reread. Now, here's one of my favorite strategies: visualizing. It's basically making a movie in your brain. I mean, your brain is incredible. It can take a bunch of scribbles. Basically, these are really just squiggles on a line, and it can turn them into full pictures. And if you know how to pay attention to the words, those pictures are going to be even better and come even more easily. So all you really have to do is try to close your eyes and see it in your mind. That's what good readers do. But here's some challenge information to help some of you. The who, what, where, the person, place, or thing the book is about, that's the noun. So pay attention to the nouns to think about, well, what am I going to picture? What will the picture be of? The words that describe that noun, those are the adjectives, like the ones that tell you what color it is or what size it is: red, blue, huge, tiny. Those words will help paint your pictures too. The actions that those characters are taking, whatever they're doing, that's the verb. Pay close attention to the verbs so you know what motion to put into your brain. And the words that describe those verbs, like slowly, quickly, those are your adverbs. They can also help make the details of your brain picture even better. Now, it's really not important that you know the names of the parts of speech right now. That's bonus information. But for some people, it really does help with the metacognition. The more you practice it, the easier it's going to get. And pretty soon, your brain will be making a movie all on its own. A few final thoughts to wrap up our Reading in a Nutshell Comprehension edition. When you're working on learning new skills, it's generally best to begin with text that's easy for your child. If you're reading aloud, read information that it's easy for them to understand. And if they're doing the reading, pick books that it's easy for them to read. When you are practicing a skill that you've already learned, it's okay to use information that's right at your child's reading level, where they are comfortable, or when you can read aloud to them something that's pretty much as they can comprehend. If you want to challenge your child's ability, it is okay to read more challenging information to them and help them, stretch. But remember, frustration is only valuable once a child learns that frustration can help you reach success. So you need to have some successes first. So start easy and gradually increase the difficulty. Now, there is scads of information and research about how right now is the best time for you to learn to read. The longer you wait, the harder it is for your brain to create the pathways that are needed for all the different kinds of information for your brain to really understand what's going on. As I said, some sixth graders began to love reading in sixth grade, but by then it was really tough for them to learn it. The window of opportunity for you is open right now, and it'll start closing, most research says, by the end of first grade. So don't wait through the summer, and don't just sit through first grade figuring it'll come later. Start working on it now, but the work is going to become fun, because remember, the better you become at reading, the easier it is. If you read about pirates, you're going to feel like you're on a pirate ship. If you're reading about a ballerina, you'll feel like you're dancing. When you read about dinosaurs, you will be in the time of the dinosaurs or right next to that scientist who's making those incredible discoveries. All the stories ever told, all the information ever learned, it's waiting for you in a book.